Thanks a lot for taking out time on a Saturday morning. So I'll just maybe double down on a couple of things that, Vivek and Angela mentioned. So I've been doing this since 2015. I've been coming to campus almost every year. Earlier, I used to spend more time, almost like a week on campus, doing more one-to-one sessions. Since then, life has caught up, been more busy, so only managed to come to campus on one day. But I think, like Vivek articulated, right, the intent of doing this early, and this almost comes from, discussion I had with Vivek few months back, discussion I had with Priyanka a few months back, right, that the biggest challenge that at least I have observed over the years when it comes to placement processes, right, specifically related to consulting, is that a lot of students end up starting their preparation closer to the date. So typically the way the process will work is, right, like you're in the process of making up your mind, you apply for a company, you're not sure whether you want to go for it or not. Given that you've done well academically, you've done well in multiple cultural activities, sports activities, you end up getting shortlisted. A lot of students who have the highest chance of converting that interview, right, who get shortlisted, end up starting their preparation on the day of getting the shortlist or even 2-3 days after. The challenge that happens is then you often do not have enough time to do justice to yourself when D-Day comes in. Okay. So the intent of this session today is that we have 1 hour with us, right? I honestly don't have an agenda. This has to be as interactive as possible, right? I would again request people to switch on their videos. I understand it's terrible to like have Zoom video on. When I used to do like online meetings and all, like I would prefer not opening up the videos, right? What I would request is open up your videos for the first 10 minutes and then switch it off if you want, right? And anytime you're asking a question, then you absolutely should have your video on. The reason for that is very simple, right? Like doing this. So I've done these workshops at different colleges, at IIMs and right, all. The benefit of doing it in a more homogeneous group is that you have a better pulse of the audience, right? With Ashoka, the challenge always is everyone has very different backgrounds, everyone has very different takes, right? So it's often easy to lose your audience. The way I am able to at least get a pulse of that is by looking at people's faces, right? So the reason to switch on the video is almost like a request for you to allow me to be more effective, right? So that we can make the most of this session, right? So that's the broad idea. Like I said, there is no agenda at all, right? Happy to take any questions for the first 15-20 minutes to get a sense of what's your level of understanding right now, what your expectations are, what do you think about consulting, what are your questions around preparation, right? So let's set the ball rolling with some questions. And then from that, I can figure out, like what's the most pressing thing out here, and we can build from that. So the floor is for you guys to take it up. Whoever wants to shoot the first question.
Yeah, maybe I can start, Aditya.
Sure. Yeah, Rishabh also raised his hand.
Yeah, so okay, Rishabh, you go ahead.
Aditya, thank you so much. So my question was that you just said that, you need to start your preparation earlier, but how do you know consulting is for you in the first place? Like, I genuinely don't know where I'm heading. So how do I first make sure that this is the place I want to go?
I was really hoping someone starts with that question. Thanks a lot, Rishabh, for that, right? So before I even come to your question, right, let me just talk about something which is more macro, right? So there are two aspects to this, right? One is the job of consulting, wherein, Rishabh, I think your question is, right, whether I want to work in this space or not. The second is the process of preparing for consulting, right? And I would treat these two slightly separately and the approach to these two parts slightly separately, right? So whether consulting is the right profession for you or not, To be honest, if you ask people who have joined consulting, right, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year down the line, also they are thinking, yaar, sahi decision liya tha kya? Right? So it's a never-ending question. But let me briefly talk about what a consultant's job is. How does that feed into the preparation process, and why that has a spillover effect on everything else? Okay. So consulting in a nutshell, right, is basically a company will have a particular problem. Okay. These problems can have various shapes and sizes. They could be that we want to increase our profits, we want to reduce our costs, we are facing high degree of employee churn, right? Anything that can go wrong with a company is part of the mandate that a consulting firm can handle, right? And you're just talking about corporate consulting, right? We have a lot of social consulting firms also, right, who will be dealing with similar set of problems, right? So the way I think about consulting is, think of it as a bridge, right? A bridge has a starting point and an ending point, right? So any organization, whether in the public space or not-for-profit organization, that's at point number A. They want to go to point number B, right? That could be higher profits, lower costs, better employee retention, whatever it is, right? And they don't know the path from going from point A to point B, right? The reason they get consultants in is to make that bridge going from point A to point B. The reason they bring in consultants are because consultants are effectively able to do three things very well, right? One, it's quite likely that especially a bigger consulting firm would have solved a problem like this in the past. So they already have a very good starting point and an understanding of what are the risks and opportunities in building that bridge, right? What ends up happening is, right, let's say, Rishabh, what's your major?
Economics.
Economics, right? So, Rishabh, you would have a lot of in-depth knowledge about economics, but you would have a cursory knowledge of what your friends in psychology are doing, right? But they would be the experts in that. You would not be, right? But you would have some sense. Most of the companies are like that, right? They are focused on the day-to-day operations. They have a sense of what's happening in the market, right? But they have not really had the bandwidth or sometimes the inclination to be able to figure the associated opportunities. That's where the consultants come in. That, hey, we've done psych major 5 times in the past. We've done econ major 5 times in the past, right? We can effectively tell you how to build a bridge between these things, right? So the first reason is consultants bring in certain amount of expertise, they already have a step up. The second thing that they're able to do is they bring in a certain amount of energy into the organization, right? Typically, every time a consulting firm would come into an organization, there'll be a lot of processes which get set up, right? Like when I was working on my last client in McKinsey, we would have like weekly check-ins with the clients. We will have like monthly, what we call the steering committee meetings. So things which ideally would have been kept on the back burner, right, now have a lot of energy added to it because you have an external party who's pushing the agenda very strongly, right? Largely driven by the promoter mandate, right? The third thing is they bring about certain amount of credibility, right? What ends up happening is, if let's say you are in a set of students are, right, let's say discussing a particular topic, right? 5 people are talking about something, 5 people will have 5 different views, right? Then you'll typically like, yeah, let's ask the professor what their opinion is, right? And kind of that would move towards a closing argument, right? That you start building, okay, professor has certain experience, he's saying something or she's saying something that kind of makes sense, right? Kind of consultants bring that expertise. Normally in an organization, if there are different leaders within the organization, they will have different viewpoints. Consultants are very adept at bringing closure and bringing convergence in the discussions in the organization. Okay. So like a senior partner had once, taught me that there are 3 types of problem statements that a consultant faces. Okay. The first problem statement is the organization doesn't know what to do. Okay. We want to grow. We don't know how to grow. Help us grow. That's problem statement number 1. Problem statement number 2, organization wants to grow, but 5 leaders in the organization have 5 different views on how to grow. Okay. Let's say you're an India-based company. Leader 1 says, let's go into Bangladesh. Leader 2 says, let's go into Sri Lanka. Leader 3 says, let's go into Vietnam. Leader 4 says, let's go into Japan or whatever, right? Now, how do you build consensus around this, right? So that's problem statement number 2, when there are multiple streams of thoughts and you kind of bring a convergence into that. The third is the organization knows what to do. They're aligned on what to do, but they don't have the systems and processes to achieve that goal. Okay. So you can broadly think of problems at these 3 levels. Okay. That kind of summarizes what a consultant's job is, right? This is still at a very high level. The day-to-day operations are, I would say, more interesting. Okay. So now, what does the job then end up entailing, right? Effectively, what the job will require you to do are 3 things, right? 1, you need to be someone who's very good when it comes to working with people. Okay. Like one of my partners in McKinsey used to tell me, we're not hiring rocket scientists, because even if you create the best and the most perfect solution for a problem statement, but the clients don't agree with it, that's completely useless, right? Because in the end, it's the client's organization where you are serving, right? So you need someone who understands what people would accept and not accept. You're someone who can iteratively drive alignment whenever situations are tough, right? So first thing you require is someone who's very good with people, right? Second thing that you require is someone who's very well structured. Okay. What do I mean by that? Okay. Let's take the basic problem, right? Rishabh, given your question, I'll request you to just chime along, right? If let's say a company wants to grow their profits by 20%, how would you even start approaching this problem?
I mean, I would think about firstly, probably create a benchmark and see where they're going wrong, maybe.
Makes sense. Now, just building on that, right? Typically, what will end up happening is a large goal is often a sum of parts, right? It's not going to be that you do just one thing and that will drive 20% growth. It's probably going to be, let's say, 7 different things. One adds 3%, one adds 5%, the other adds 2%, the other adds 1%, right? And you have to then come to these individual levels, right? So when we talk about problem structuring, right, and that's probably the most important focus in an interview, right, is you basically start with, hey, problems is to grow profits. Profits are effectively a function of only 2 things, right? Profits will grow if your revenues grow and your costs don't, or if your revenues stay stable and your costs go down, right? This is what is called being MECE. Okay, that's a term as you start your preparation, you will hear over and over again. MECE stands for something being mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Okay, so what does that mean? Profits are a function of only two things, right? Revenues and cost. They are mutually exclusive. What goes in the revenue line item does not go into the cost line item, and they're collectively exhausted. There's no third thing out there, right? When I do my workshop, I love to do this exercise with people, right? Again, Rishabh, what are the constituent parts of your mobile phone?
I mean, the physical part or
whatever, right? What are the constituent part of your mobile phones?
Right. I mean, the camera, the screen.
Go on, just tell me everything that comes to mind.
The camera, the screen, somebody said motherboard. I think these things can go.
It's hard that when you're trying to list things down, right? You'll probably do like 3, 5, 7, and then you'll go for a pause, right? That's how most people end up attacking a problem. they'll start listing things down which can help solve this problem, or which are whatever, like constituent parts in this case. However, let's approach this slightly differently. Okay. When we talk about constituent parts, let's break this down into two parts. There's a hardware and there's a software. Okay. Now, let's break down software, right? Now, you could say software are, let's say, pre-installed apps and or pre-installed configuration and what you actively install. Pre-installed could be broken down into, let's say, operating software and apps, right? Apps could be broken down into entertainment, non-entertainment, right? On the hardware side, you could maybe break it down to what is visible, what is not visible, right? So what's on the surface versus what's inside, right? The idea is, by doing this tree-like approach, when you're breaking down everything into two parts or three parts, right, you're ensuring that you don't miss out on anything, right? And it's easy if you actually do this exercise for even like a minute, you'll be actually be able to list down like 20 things that are in your mobile phone. Versus if you're listing things down, you probably like, you can very rapidly give like 5, and then it will slow down. Versus the structured approach will be slower upfront because you're creating this structure, but it will ensure that you don't miss out on anything. Okay. That's effectively what you're doing as a consultant, right? You're taking a big problem statement, you're breaking it down into smaller parts, right? And then there's a lot which goes into how do you then do a real engagement and all of those things. But this is the most important part. Now, getting to the interview, right? This is the thing that gets tested the most in the interview. Typically, the way consulting interview will be set up, right? And you'll hear more about this as the process starts, right? It's typically a 40 minutes plus minus 10 minutes kind of a discussion, right? I think now interviews are slightly shorter as well sometimes. Approximately 15 to 20% of your interview time will be when people are trying to understand about your experience, what your life has been, right? What people call quote unquote HR questions, right? And the remaining 75 to 80% of the time will be spent solving a case. Case is nothing but you will be given an industry situation that, let's say there's a company which makes detergents and they want to increase their profits by 20%, right? As a consultant, how would you advise them? And what will be tested is your ability to break this problem down into its constituent parts, right? And how well do you communicate your solution? What is your business acumen in being able to say, okay? So what will happen is you will end up getting a lot of pieces of information as part of the discussion, right? It's not just one problem statement, right? The way someone would approach this is you get the problem statement. It's a bare shell one-liner. You will ask a few questions as an interviewee, okay? You'll get some more data points, right? So here in this case, you want to understand, okay, fine, if they want to grow by 20% this year, just want to understand how have they grown last year, the last 2-3 years, why the sudden need to want to grow to 20%, how is the industry performing, blah, 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 right? As you practice, you will realize there are certain set of almost like standard questions you would want to cover, right? To get smarter about any industry, about any space. Okay. So you get that information, and the objective in the process will be, as you structure this problem, how do you leverage all the information that you have, right? To your questioning, how do you fit into your hypothesis? Okay. If I say, you know, they've already taken like a massive cost reduction exercise last year, right? So you would kind of want to believe that maybe if they want to reduce costs now, it's going to be slightly more difficult because they've already maybe sought out efficiencies last year, right? So you get these pieces of information, you have to put them into the puzzle together. Okay. So that's largely the process, right? Now, almost coming to your question, Rishabh, I'll now look at it at two parts, right? Whether consulting is for you or not, right? The best way to understand that is to talk to people. Okay. Now you have like, given the university's been there for a decade, you're a bunch of alums who have worked in this space, right? Specifically, talk to people who have graduated the last 1 or 2 years, right? Talk to your seniors, get a sense of whether this is for you or not, right? I'll tell you how it works at IIMs. People often don't care about this question that much. Okay. In fact, in IIT, I would say things have changed slightly, but when I was in IIT 10 years back, again, people didn't really care. They were like, if BCG, McKinsey, Bain, ATK are willing to hire me, right, I'm willing to get hired, right? For the simple reason that I would say there are two intertwined reasons for that. Reason number one is that working in consulting kind of teaches you the basics of business and really sharpens your toolkit as a professional. You become a better problem solver, you become a better mediator, you become a better communicator. All of those things that you would want if you look at a CEO today, right? The kind of skills you would believe they have, consulting is basically a fast track way of getting those skills. Okay. Because day one, at least in McKinsey, you will interact with senior management. You will, one, learn from them how they are looking at. Second, to work with them, you will have to become more like them, right? So your development happens at an accelerated rate, which ties into the second aspect, which is if you look at, let's say, someone who's gone into consulting versus someone who's gone into different professions, right? Typically, at least the historic trend was that 2 years of consulting gets you better exit opportunities and let's say versus doing 2 years of something else. I understand now things have changed, product management, right? Also is like super lucrative, getting into tech is great, right? So between these 2, 3, 4 areas, right, that could be of interest, right? If your main aim is to, let's say, be a smarter business leader, right, and have an accelerated path to it, I think then consulting makes a ton of sense. If you are someone who wants to do, let's say, something which is super hands-on, right, you want to build things with your own hands, right, effectively, then this job may not offer that level of satisfaction. Okay. So think about what are the things that matter to you, right? And again, it's very hard to come out with a list on day one, but maybe have a hypothesis that I think these are 3 things which matter to me. And really quiz people on, whether consulting can serve those needs. And then maybe your list changes, right? And you keep doing that process. So that's on whether consulting is for someone or not. But a more important question specifically for this session is why today you may choose that, let's say you don't want to get into consulting. Why going through the consulting process itself is helpful? Okay. For 2 reasons. One, and this again, it comes from just like multiple interactions with students at Ashoka, right? One was some of you might end up doing an MBA later, right? And they were like, yeah, we've already done the preparation in our undergrad. It gave us massive advantage over our peers when we were preparing for consulting when we were in B school. And consulting is the primary recruiter in B schools. Okay. So kind of gives you leverage later. But more importantly, what it does is, from what I've articulated, right, this is not about reading 10 books, making Excel models. Your preparation is just about thinking. All this involves when you're preparing for a consulting interview is that you have to think. You have a problem statement, how do you break it down? You have a problem statement, how do you break it down, right? The process itself makes you smarter. It gives you basically a framework to break things down generally in life. And it has a spillover effect in other industries, right? Like if you look at PM interviews, like product management interviews, right? A bunch of companies in product management ask cases. If you look at startups today, right, even for basic general management roles, right, they would ask, a lot of them would ask case studies, right, in their interviews. And there are 2 reasons for that. One, a lot of ex-consultants are there in these companies. So they've gone through the process. They think it's a good interviewing process. But the second is, honestly, in an organization, what you want is a good problem solver, right? Take it Microsoft, take it any other thing, right? Like any job that you have, you will have problems and you need someone who's a good problem solver. At least so far, there has not been any other methodology of judging whether someone is a good problem solver or not than asking a case interview. Okay. So that's why even if you're not sure, do this, because A, it will make you smarter. Second, it will have a spillover effect for preparation for different sectors. Okay. And I took like 25 minutes to answer that one question, but I thought it gives like a full overview as well. Let me know, Rishabh, if you have any follow-up questions, if others have any follow-up questions. I see Ishan's hand is raised, but Rishabh, before that, if you have anything.
Yeah, no. Thanks a lot. That was really helpful. Thanks.
Cool. Just one second, Ishan, before we get to you. I'll just again like take a check with like the group. Going too fast, going too slow, going too abstract, relevant, not relevant, you can put in the chat box, right? Because we already have like half the session done, right? So just want to understand what will be most helpful for the next 30 minutes. Maybe let's like, and just feel free to like unmute yourself and speak. Cool. Ishan, let's go with you.
Yeah, hi Aditya. Thank you for describing this because I think you broke down consulting into a framework. But my question is that could you tell us what would the shortlisting criteria be? I understand that some companies assign weights to stuff and some companies have a cutoff. How does that work? Like, what is judged in which manner? Can you please give me an idea of that?
Sure, Ishan. So, given that this is not something that companies discuss in the open, right? Let me at least give you like a broad sense. Okay. So, there are broadly 4 buckets, right, on which people are evaluated, or on a CV where people look at things. The first bucket is academics. And this is not in any particular priority order, by the way. I'm just saying, like, typically people put academics first. First bucket is academics. Second is work experience. Third is extracurricular activities. Fourth is leadership. Okay. Now, I think this is a good question because I want to just cover upon a few things on how to, let's say, create a consulting CV as well, right? And I've shortlisted CVs both at Ashoka in the past and at IIM Ahmedabad when I was in McKinsey. What I'll actually focus on the CV. I'll take the CV part of it because that kind of, I think, feeds into the larger question, Ishan. So, few things to keep in mind as you think about making your CVs, right? Sorry, have the CVs already been submitted? Or are you in the process of making them? No, right? Yeah. One is a consultant who's shortlisting your CV probably is doing this on a weekend or late, like at 12, 1 o'clock in the night after their like normal run-of-the-mill work is done. I've done this process when you have to look at like 40 CVs in like a span of 2-3 days. And you know that you have other pressing things to do, which a consultant almost will have, right? All you want from a CV is, can this person tell me from their CV, why should they be shortlisted? Okay. If I have to find evidence of why this would be a good candidate, right? Honestly speaking, everyone's a human, right? Like people end up missing things on CVs, right? So the basic principle is less is more. I've seen CVs which have like not like an inch of space, white space left. It's very, very hard to read that CV, right? So as you make your CVs, think about whether they are simple enough to read. And if someone wants to look at it only for 10 seconds, do they have a clear sense of your performance on these 4 buckets? Which is academics, work experience, extracurricular activities, and leadership. The way to do that, right, is don't write something you did in class 6. Right. There are few principles I at least used to keep in mind, and there's always a rubric that consulting firms have, right? These are campus-specific rubrics, right? So they would know in Ashoka, quote unquote, right? What does someone who's like, let's say, top 5% of the class on all of these aspects, right, would look like. So in leadership, maybe top 5% would be, people who are part of the student government, or there are certain clubs which are more selective than the other, right? So if you have led them, if you're part of them, right? For cultural activities, what's like the most hyped cultural activity on campus, right? Are you a part of that, right? So the set rubric. So the key principles to keep in mind are: 1, recency matters. If you were a cricket player, let's say, even if you played, let's say, whatever, under 15 cricket, and I don't see you playing cricket after that, right? I'm not sure what's happening here. Right? So consistency in achievements matter. Scale of achievements matter. Okay. College level quizzing champ versus a state level quizzing champ versus a national level quizzing champ. Right? All of these 3 things have different impact. Okay. So consistency matter, scale matter, recencies matter. Right? If you have to prioritize your achievements that have happened in the last few years versus years past, right? One call out there are certain activities which are spikes in the past. Maybe you won a national level and international level competition when you were in grade 11. Sure, highlight that, right? Because it may not allow for consistency, okay? There's a one-off kind of an event, right? So consistency matter, scale matter, recency matter. Right? Quantification matters. Okay. You're saying won multiple quiz competitions at national level, right? Multiple can stand for 2, multiple can stand for 100, right? So don't be vague in your articulation of any of these things. Be as quantitative as possible, right? Especially this becomes a challenge when people are writing about their work experience, right? You would, if you're in a final year, right, bunch of you would have already done, let's say, 1 or 2 internships, right? There are always 2 things which I find funny when I'm looking at, work experience section. The first part is people will talk in just like superlatives without giving any numbers. Okay. They'll be like, turned around the company, increased efficiency massively, right? Tell me what's that right number. Is it like a 2% efficiency increase? Or the 1% efficiency increase, right? Then I would want to understand how did you do it, right? So you might have heard there are certain frameworks, right? There is something called RAS, okay, which is you start with your result, you go to the action, and you describe the situation. Okay. How would that look like? So, achieved 2% reduction in employee cost by benchmarking. So that's the result. The action is by benchmarking salary structure for industry peers. That's the action. Situation, as this was a key CEO priority, or in an organization which was facing high employee churn, or in an organization which was facing cost pressures. Okay. If a standalone statement has all these 3 components, you can break it down into 2 parts. For me, that is super helpful when I'm looking at a CV, because I can now see, okay, this is the result, this is the action, and this is the situation. Okay. Similarly, if you're writing, let's say, about you won an election, right? People will just write, let's say, I was the head of the student government, right? I don't know what that means, right? Won an election out of 6 candidates, getting the highest vote share for representing a student body of 1,500 students for discussion on student critical issues with the university administration. That's a more complete statement, right? The second thing to keep in mind is people sometimes talk about just their achievements, but not what they did afterwards. If you were the student government head, sure, like great, right? There'll be three things you can do. The first is you could have been a lousy student president and done nothing. Second is you would have inherited a set of activities from your predecessor and you've just like continued doing run-of-the-mill stuff. Third is you have taken certain initiatives and built out new things for the club or society you're a part of, right? What matters most is the third thing. Because all of this effectively, if you look at it, and I'll go section by section on how I think about it, all of this effectively goes into certain skill sets, right? When I'm looking at a CV, what am I effectively trying to establish, right? I'm trying to establish whether this person has the skill sets that are required to be a good consultant. Okay. What are the skill sets that are required to be a good consultant, right? I described some of them, right? One is good structured problem solving. Second is having good communication skills. But the softer aspects are also crucially important, right? Are you extremely hardworking? Are you someone who takes a lot of ownership? Are you someone who's able to drive things, right? So when you highlight new initiatives you have taken as part of a club or society or as part of an organization you worked for, right? That shows that this person has very high degree of ownership, that this person was not just satisfied with what the status quo was, but was trying to go beyond the call of duty and do more things. Okay. Why academic? And I'll just go section by section, right? Like why academics matter. Honestly, do I know whether someone who has a 3.9 GPA versus a 3.1 GPA, right? Who's going to do well in life? Of course not, right? What academic performance signifies in my mind, and this is not like a consulting analogy, how I used to think about these things. If someone has great grades, right? What it tells me is that this person probably has the ability to just do one thing perfectly, right? So this person is very diligent. This person can let go of other distractions and can really focus on task at hand. Okay. What does having a good work experience suggest, right? And when I say good work experience, typically what gets valued is if you're been part of branded organizations, right? Because let's say if you worked in your whatever, right, your dad's company or your uncle's company, right, which is not very well known. The challenge is I don't know how you were selected and whatever work that you did, how to even value that. Versus, let's say, if some of you interned at, let's say, HUL or some named startup, I would typically have a feeling that someone else has already evaluated this person and this person has cleared their evaluation criteria. So it's almost like a social proof, right? That's why like the internship section ends up mattering, right? Why do extracurricular activities matter? Because like I said, right, consulting at the end of the day is a team game, right? You have to work with your clients, you have to collaborate with them, right? When someone has shown consistency in the extracurricular activities, the biggest message that I end up deriving from that, hey, this person would be good at working with people. And then there are certain extracurricular activities. Like someone has, let's say, done debating for multiple years, right? That kind of gives me a sense, okay, fine, this person would at least be like a good communicator, right? Is structured in their thinking, right? And again, leadership matters for very similar reasons, right? Like it shows initiative, it shows ability to work with people, right? So now when you look at your CV, think about if someone is looking at this for like 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, what are the qualities that they will distill from my CV? Am I coming across someone who works hard, someone who's committed, someone who has high integrity, someone who can work with people, someone who takes high degree of ownership and initiative? Do some of these things come through very clearly or not? Okay. If you have that, then you honestly have a very good chance of getting shortlisted. So, Ishan, I hope that kind of answers your question. Let me know if you like have a follow-up.
No, thanks.
Cool.
It does answer my question.
Okay. One thing I will just say about CV making, right, is think about consistency, right? Like, honestly, like sometimes people would ask, if let's say I had a GPA of 3.2, right? Does that like immediately rule me out from the contention for getting a shortlist, right? The answer is no, right? Effectively, out of these 4 sections, what firms will look at is, are you like absolutely outstanding in at least 2 sections? Okay. If you were at a 3.2, right, I should be able to justify your getting a 3.2 from the rest of your CV. That, okay, I'm like, okay, this person had a 3.2 because this person was doing like 20 other things on campus. And out of those 20 things, this person has achieved a certain amount of, let's say, social capital in 3 of them. Let's say you were volunteering for 20 organizations on campus, or you were like student member of 20 organizations, but you did not achieve leadership position in even one of them, right? For me, that's an inconsistent story, because I'm like, this person did not focus on academics to focus on extracurricular and leadership roles, on extracurricular activities, sure. But this person could not convince others to effectively take up the leadership role within those organizations, right? So this person is a hustler, but hustler without results. That's probably the takeaway I would have, right? And that could be completely a misjudgment of the individual, but that's the constraint in which you work, right, when you are looking at a CV. So just keep that in mind. I think someone, Ishan, that's your question. Is social impact volunteering counted in that criteria? See, again, it's hard for me to take a bucket and say whether this would be classified as something which is net positive or not, right? It would depend upon the specific name. It would be the description of the work that you have done, right? You could have worked at a 5-member organization. Let's say you are volunteering somewhere, right? But you grew it from 5 to 15. Or you like did like 10 new things in the organization. That would matter far more to me than someone who joined a 500-member team, right, and had nothing to show for it. So, like I said, all of this has to be looked at in a larger totality. It's hard to like figure out, okay, this one thing, does it make sense or not? Always evaluate everything you're putting in your CV from the reader's lens. Okay. What quality will the reader distill from this point? Okay. That's the only. And that way you will kind of realize, right? If you organized a blood camp somewhere, right? Like when you were in school, right? Like, sure, like probably you were part of like a volunteering organization in school, kiya tha. But if you're like, I did that, then I effectively created a Blood Connect chapter in my city or in my college, and I have now done like 50 blood camps in different organizations. I'm like, wow, this person took like seed that was there in like grade 8 and has built something out of that. Yeah, cool. So I think first question took like 30 minutes, second took like 15 minutes. We have space for like 10 more minutes. Last 5 minutes, I'll talk about preparation strategy. Any question?
Hello, I wanted to ask one thing. Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, as you mentioned, like consulting provides a good gateway to get into other fields as well. So, generally, people who have worked for 2 years at a consulting firm can easily switch to other companies. But that has also become a trend. Like people, so my intention of getting into a consulting is that it will provide me a good exit option into like getting into a good VC or a good other sort of company. So do consulting firms actually realize this trend is happening? And because consulting firms also are investing a lot of their time and resources into training someone, and then seeing that a lot of people exit after 2 years of their hard work, do consulting firms really want people like them or not?
Let me take that in 2 parts, right? And I'll restrict my answer only to McKinsey because that's the organization I have seen closely upfront. Till a few years back, when McKinsey used to hire analysts, which is undergrad students, right? They actually had a structured program where I think 95% of the class will be asked to leave after like, I think it was like 18 or 24 months. And the idea was, we've trained you with certain toolkits, do good with this, do your MBA, and then join back McKinsey. And McKinsey will benefit from this because you would have done different things. You will bring in different kind of thinking to the organization once you come back, right? So there was almost like an active focus on churning people out at an undergrad level and reintegrating them later on once they are, let's say, at a higher experience level. Okay, that has changed over a period of time. But, you know, honestly, when I was at McKinsey, it was incredible that that's one of the organizations where conversations around leaving, right, are extremely common. People will guide you, people will mentor you on whether a particular exit opportunity makes sense or not. When I was leaving McKinsey last year to join SteadView, I talked to my manager, AP, partner, senior partner, right, on how I should be thinking about this. So there is a significant amount of openness in, you know, discussing this. And it works, right? Effectively, it's a pyramid organization. All organizations effectively end up looking like a pyramid, right? You will have there are limited number of partners, there are more number of managers, there are more number of associates and analysts, right? So there is a natural churn that everyone understands, expects, and anticipates. Okay. So I don't think there is, I don't think, and this has not been like a recent trend, like this has always happened, right? That consultants have a varying tenure, some leave after 1 year, some leave after 2 years, some leave after 3 years. And there's no prejudice against them. Like, I'm part of a McKinsey alumni group. It's so vibrant. Like, no one's like, oh, tumne jaldi chhod diya. Yeah, main 20 saal tha, tum 2 saal the, or anything of that sort, right? Everyone understands that.
One more thing I wanted to ask regarding, so a lot of people also have intentions of, first of all, getting placement and then going for a master's. So generally, does good consulting firms provide an option for people to prepare for examinations and getting ready for the master's, or is it difficult to go for master's after getting into a job? I mean, a lot of people do, just wanted to understand the feasibility of that.
So when you say you have to prepare for master's, you mean just like preparing for your GMAT and GRE?
Yes.
Hi, so in most consulting firms, weekends are protected. So you can always prepare over the weekend. And at least for an MBA, for certain people, consulting firms also fund the MBA. There's some riders to it that you have to then work, you have to come back and work for a few years, typically whatever, 2-3 years. But yeah, like, and a lot of people love that benefit also, that the job is paying for a good part of the MBA.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? So I'll give you like one basic insight. At least this used to be true a few years back. I don't know why there's almost like a correlation to it, but when I used to do my sessions, on day one, you could figure out who are the people who are most likely to convert. It was almost a function of interactiveness. Because I think it just fed into how quickly those folks were willing to start their preparation, right? So in some ways, when you ask a question, you interact, it gives you a higher skin in the game, right? So it's almost like a psychological loop, feedback loop, which gets created in your mind, right? If you ask a question, your mind tells you you're interested in this space, and you'll probably take this more seriously, right? So from that lens also, I would kind of encourage people to just ask more questions. Or maybe we have just space for one more question.
I just wanted to ask whether you have suggestions for any online resources if one wants to start their preparation?
Cool. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to spend the last 5 minutes on. Let's start there. Cool. So, how to go about preparing, right? Like I described initially, this is basically an exercise in thinking more clearly. Right. When I take my workshop, like my workshops are typically titled, the first slide will have this title, which is thinking outside the box, but along the lines. Right. For me, that kind of describes the mindset that you need to have. You need to always be creative, but you have to work along the lines, right? You have to have a structure in your approach. Okay. So so the way I define the preparation strategy is in 4 phases. Okay. With phase 3 and phase 4, like kind of merging into each other. But let me break it into 5 phases, right? Like 5 phases, 2 and 3 merge together, 4 and 5 merge together. Phase number 1 is, what I had done in 2020. 2020 was the first year when I had the benefit of doing this workshop online. And I took the benefit of that and recording all the videos from the workshop. So it's typically like a 6 to 8 hour workshop that I used to do, right? So it's the workshop designed for Ashoka and delivered at Ashoka. And all the videos are up on YouTube. I'm just sharing the link on the chat. And maybe, Anjala, you can also kind of circulate that with the students later on, right? My suggestion would be all the videos on this playlist are numbered. Just go through them one by one. Okay. Listen to whatever, like 1.25, 1.5x, right? But this can be the base for your preparation. And what I would want to do when I come back in September. So normally what I do in my workshop is every year I just reiterate this playlist. Almost case by case. So when I would be on Ashoka campus 6 to 8 hours, I'll do all of these cases, right? It almost always gives me a certain level of disquiet that I have to repeat this because I'm like, hey, this is already online. You can watch this online. When I'm on campus, let's do advanced problem solving. I want to solve your... So the challenge is when I used to come for workshops, the focus used to be getting students from 0 to 80, right? And earlier, when I used to do 2 workshops, when I used to come to campus twice, I would do one from 0 to 80. And then for people who have been shortlisted, I would spend more time with them to get them from 80 to 100. Right? Given we have just one interaction, my strong push will be for people who are very serious, watch all of these videos so that when I come September 1st week, when you're like 2 weeks away from your interviews, right? We focus on the really tough things, right? Rather than focusing on the yaar, ye missy hota hai, this is 80-20, this is how a guesstimate looks like, right? So we can do the workshop very differently, right? And I don't know how to do this, but maybe Anjala, we can discuss this. If there's a way, because the biggest fear I would have is when I come in September, there are a bunch of students who have looked at the videos, bunch of students who have not looked at the videos, and you have this massive mismatch in the understanding level of the student group. So I'll be either too advanced for a set or too boring for the other set, if I end up repeating myself, right? So what I would do, and this is a benefit for everyone on the call, I will not focus on these videos. I will focus on new stuff, your questions when I come back in September. So if you want that session to be effective, it's prudent you do this basic work yourself, right? So that's step number 1. Step number 2 is there's this like the OG of like case prep, right? The person who first put this like this can be like taught properly was this guy called Victor Cheng. He was an ex-McKinsey consultant in the US. He has his YouTube videos. I would suggest it's not very relevant to go through them if you go through this set because they are more from a US context, I would say. But he has these set of audio cases called Look Over My Shoulder. Okay. Where what he does is he will basically solve a live case. and he'll solve the same case 3 or 4 times. One would be when he's an interviewer and a rookie is solving it. Second would be someone who's at an intermediate level when they are solving it. Third would be when an expert is solving it. When you see the same problem statement solved from 3 different lenses, I found that to be a massive learning experience, because between the 3, you realize where you are, what are the kind of mistakes that you make. Okay. So almost step by step, right? Like what will be your journey curve, right? When you watch the videos, the hope will be all your basics are clear, right? But knowing theory and knowing and doing something in practice are very different, right? So the videos will clear all the basics that are required for case prep. The cases will tell you how to communicate what you have learned better. Okay. The third step is there are a bunch of case books that are out there, right? Almost all B school come out with their own case books, right? Like when I used to be at IIM Ahmedabad, we used to come up with our own case book. They're almost freely available. People share them over LinkedIn very easily, right? Go over some of these case books and just read cases. The idea there is, once you read a problem statement, you will get a sense of, okay, now that I know the basics, this is how I will broadly approach the problem. And then you just read the solution and you're like, okay, this is like, makes sense. This is just to expand your exposure set, okay, to different problem statements. And here, my suggestion would be like, pick maybe 2 and not overextend yourself. If you have more time, sure. But this is not a function of just effort, right? If you have a lot of people are natural problem solvers, they can probably like, there's naturally very structured, maybe like 5 cases, they're like, I have this sorted. And some people may not get this even after doing 500 cases. So instead of focusing on quantity, focus on what's your delta, right? Do you think you're able to structure any problem? The key question before your day of interview that you need to ask yourself is, whatever comes tomorrow, whatever problem that comes in tomorrow, can I structure this or not? If your answer is yes, honestly, my sense would be that you're through, right? Anjali, can we go on for like 2-3 minutes more?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'll just complete this thread, right? So that's the third thing, right? Reading cases. My suggestion would be, there's a book called Case Interview Cracked. It's available on Amazon. Those guys are like absolutely fantastic. I learned most of what I had to learn about case solving from reading that book initially. And I'm trying to build on that. And then I would say pick up like IIM Ahmedabad case book. You can pick IIM Bangalore, IIM Calcutta, like whatever is your favorite one, but like maybe just restrict yourself to 2 resources. Now, the first 3 elements put together are still like theory, right? Now comes like step number 4 and 5, which are practice. Typically, how people would end up doing this is people make like groups of 2 or 3, right? And that's like a dedicated group of people, right? Like, let's say on my screen, I have Aditya, Ishan, and Prabal, right? Maybe you 3 band up together. What people will aim for is that let's sit every day for a couple of hours. And each of us should be able to do one case, like they are solving the case as an interviewee, and the other person is the interviewer. Okay. And you learn from both of these experiences. Okay. So the idea is to finish the first 3 steps quickly so that you have a lot of time for step number 4, which is just practicing with people, which is where the simulation of the interview is happening. Step number 5 is something I discovered for myself, which probably was the single biggest delta creator in my preparation. Honestly, when I started preparing, like even for the first month, I was pretty average in case solving because I was looking at how can I get more resources, how can I get more cases, and 10 years back, there were not a lot of resources. But what I ended up realizing was that, there are enough problem statements just around me. So problem statements largely, and you'll learn this as you go through these resources, are largely of 2 types, right? There are guesstimate problem statements, right? Guesstimates would be estimate the market size for iPads in India, estimate how much milk consumption happens in India, right? So any number that you're trying to estimate, and there's an approach that you have for that. And the second are generally strategy problems, right? Like it could be, now they could be like some company wants to increase their profits, some wants to reduce their costs, they want to enter into a new geography. It can come in different flavor. But these are broadly the two types of problem statements, strategy and guesstimates. What I realized was that I don't need my friends, right? But the challenge with having that friend group, you need to have that. But the challenge with that is you'll probably end up doing like 1 or 2 cases per day. I wanted to do 10 cases per day. And I didn't have like, I ended up talking to more people. Like after a point of time, I just stopped focusing on my group alone. And I used to focus on different people on campus. Like, jo bhi free dikhta tha, I would just like case karna and we'll do cases with them, right? But I ended up spending a lot of time with myself. And the way this works is, let's take Prabal. Prabal, aapne breakfast mein kya khaya tha?
Poha aaj.
Poha? Fantastic. Can you estimate how many people eat poha every day in India? Right? Or maybe you have chapati. We don't have to do this right now, right? But I'm just giving you how I started thinking about this. If you're having chapatis for lunch, right? How many chapatis are consumed in India in a day, right? So what I realized was, or you could do this with anything around you, right? Like I have a Bisleri bottle on my table, right? How many Bisleri bottles are sold in the country in a day, right? So the idea is you can look at anything around you and turn it into a guesstimate problem statement by estimating the market size of that. What I ended up doing was I would probably done like hundreds of such exercises. And it was sometimes very, very, very tough. If you do this poha exercise, you will realize it is very tough. You will have to look at, you will have to really think about how to break and slice and dice this market, right? What are the assumptions you will take? What are the assumptions you're comfortable with, right? So I used to start giving myself these problem statements and they made a ton of sense, okay? The other strategy problems, right? There are two ways to look at it, right? I was like, yeah, almost all discussions I'm having, right, can be turned into a strategy problem. So like if you go to my YouTube channel, there's literally like the first case is how do you reduce flooding in Bombay? And that came out of a discussion I was having with my friend. It was raining like crazy in Bombay. And I was like, yaar, government kuch karti kyun nahi hai iska? And his answer was, government kya kar sakti hai? And you were like, hey, that's a great problem statement, right? If we were consultants to the government, how would we break this problem down? Right? Similarly, whatever you believe in, right? Let's say, how do you reduce plastic consumption in India? How do you improve women's safety in Delhi, right? Take anything, any conversation that turns into a strategy problem statement, right? How do you choose your life partner, right? Or you could just pick up the newspaper and convert any headline into a strategy problem, right? Something is going wrong in the world. The problem is, the problem statement to use, how do you reverse that, right? How do you create the flip of it, right? Or if you're looking at a company, let's say Apple is trying to, now it already has, but Apple is trying to set up its retail store in India, right? They're figuring out where to set the retail store. Like, hey, that seems like a great problem statement to solve, right? And that actually is the kind of thing that you will solve as a consultant, right? If let's say you read about a startup, right? Let's say XYZ startup is facing a lot of cash burn, right? What should be their strategy to reduce cash burn, right? So whatever you're comfortable with, think about those problem statements, right? Once you do this flooding wala problem statement, you realize you don't need a lot of data also, right? No one's asking you to be correct here. But how do you break these things down from a first principle? That's the only ask. Okay. So kind of if you do these 5 things over, let's say, the next 2 months, right? Before we have our interaction, I think that can be like a 30-minute interaction itself, right? You could just, all of you can come like, ho gaya hamara, we are all set, right? Don't need this. And we can just have like paranthas at the dhaba. Perfect. So I think that's it from my end. Thanks a lot for, being around, staying patiently for the last 1 hour and 5 minutes on top of that. And best of luck for your preparation.
Thank you, Aditya, for your valuable contribution. And thank you all of you being part of the session. I wish you all the best.
Perfect. Take care, folks. Bye.
Bye-bye, and thank you.